Today I'm going to talk you through some exam technique for the IGCSE course. I'm going to start talking about analyse questions and I give you some tips so you can go about it in a really logical way and hopefully get as many marks as possible. And you can be like this chap here who's just gone through the video, absolutely nailing life, and he feels pretty overjoyed at the fact that he can answer an 8-marker analyse question at Geography GCSE. So before we can actually go and have a go at answering an analyse question, we need to know what analyse actually means. So this is the command word, and this is in the IGCSE specification. Investigate an issue by breaking it down into individual components and making logical, evidence-based connections about the causes and effects or interrelationships between the components. For some people, that might seem like gobbledygook. It might just seem really confusing. So I'm going to break it down slightly to help to explain it better. So breaking it down into individual components. When we're looking at an issue, that will just tell me that I need to realise that there are probably different factors that are going to be involved in this question. There's not just going to be one single factor. There'll be several different factors I need to talk about. Making logical and evidence-based connections. That shows me that I'm going to need to use evidence. And this will come from a source that will be given, sometimes several sources, so I need to reference back to that source. Making logical evidence-based connections about the causes and effects or interrelationship between the components. So we've said that there are different factors, but we need to then think, well, how do these factors that surrounding this issue, how do they interact, how do they interrelate, in what way do they play off each other? So to help kind of aid the understanding of this, I've given an example question here called Analyse the difference in responses to an earthquake. The first place I would start with a question like that is I'd go to the source and I'd use the source and try and see what kind of key patterns or examples are in the source that I can then apply my geographic knowledge to. I can then, when I see some patterns and examples, I can then start to think, well, how does that relate to factors I know about responding to earthquakes? And so I've put a couple here saying, well, you know, that surely the amount of money would affect how you respond. You know, the type of management strategy you've got, surely that's going to affect how you respond. But also, how much risk? If you've got really high risk, then maybe you're going to respond to it differently to elsewhere. But I would be able to probably get that from the source, and depending on what the source is, it would depend on what those different factors are. Then I need to see how those factors interact and relate with each other. And so, for example, it might be that I've worked out what I said or talked about money, and I talked about management. And if you've got more money, you can manage better. If you've got a higher risk in your country, you might be able to actually have more experience and therefore have more efficient management strategies. This is all we've taken it from the source. We've tried to work out what factors I can relate from my knowledge of the course, and then I've tried to see how they interact. And now I'll show you how to kind of step by step put that into a written answer. So to help you break down the question and write a clear answer, I've given you this pro forma, which means you should construct your answer slightly better. So you start with the source. Again, you're looking for those patterns, examples that you can use, and then start to think about them in a geographical way. That will help you come up with a point, one clear point you're trying to make. So you always start with the source, but then you'll probably come up with an idea that you're going to come across. But you need to back that point up with evidence. And where do you get the evidence from? You go back to that source. You use the source, use the examples, use the statistics, some of the evidence that's in there. That will back up that point you've made. You then need to expand that point with the evidence. So you've given me a point, you've given evidence, now you'd expand it. This is where you're talking about your wider geographical knowledge, how the factors interrelate and interact. So I'm now going to talk you through another example question. The question is, analyse the differences in the impacts of an earthquake. I've given you two different earthquake pictures here as sources. These are the sources you'd get for an exam. On the left, we've got the Haiti earthquake, a picture of that, and on the right, the Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand in 2011. What I want you to do now is I want you to stop the video and just look at these pictures. You need to look at these pictures, and what you're trying to do is asking you for the differences in the impacts. So what you need to do is look at the sources and see, again, we're looking for examples that might show difference. We're looking for evidence that might show difference, and see then if we can start applying our geographical thinking to think, why are they different? How are they different? Those are the kind of questions you should be asking yourself, and then can we think of the reasoning behind that can lead us to help develop our answer? So by just looking at these sources for less than a minute, I can see that there are some patterns, some evidence that I might be able to use. I can see that in the picture of Haiti, there's a lot of damage, and that the buildings are very closely packed together, kind of collapsed all on each other. I can see between the pictures there's a difference in the type of materials. We've got corrugated iron and bits of scrap in Haiti, but we've got bricks and mortar here. And I can also see that not all the buildings have collapsed in Christchurch, but actually, in fact, most of the buildings in the picture, apart from the one right in the middle, are still intact. Having now looked at the source and looked at the patterns, I can now start to think about the point I'm trying to make. So now, having looked at the source and interpreted them as best as I can see that Haiti has a lot more physical damage than Christchurch. So that will help me to make my point. And the point that I'm going to make to start off this analysis is to say that the different countries will experience different levels of physical damage. So now I'm starting to apply the evidence to back up that point. I've already started it here saying in source 1A we can see many collapsed buildings in Haiti, unlike and I'm carrying on with source 2A. So I'm talking about the other source now to make sure I'm using all the evidence. And I've put it just in brackets to save myself a bit of time. So unlike in source A2, Christchurch, where one building is damaged. So now, once we've looked at the source, we've found a good point and evidence to back it up, we need to expand that. This is where we are looking for those relationships between cause and effects, maybe between the different components. So we've said there's something to do with physical damage and that different countries experience different levels. So how I've expanded this is I've related it back to the idea of money here. And I'm saying that countries that are LICs, like Haiti, they can't afford, or there's that really high-end earthquake-proofing techniques, and I've put an example here of rubber shock absorbers, and the reason they can't afford this is because of limited funds, because they're an LIC. I've then gone on to really hammer the point home and says that means lots of the buildings collapse, and therefore we get widespread damage. I could have also equally made the point saying that HICs like Christchurch have a lot of investment and expertise to be able to make earthquake buildings and therefore have little damage and little physical destruction or deaths in comparison to LIC countries. What I have done there is I've analysed the question, broken it down, but use the source and evidence to back up the points I'm saying, and then apply it to the knowledge I have already got from the course, and this will help me to answer the Analyse question properly. So to make sure, once you've done that once, to get kind of full marks, getting up to those 8 marks, you need to have 3 or 4 of these well-developed points to really be in a chance of getting at the high end of the mark scheme. So to quickly recap, make sure you are looking at the sources. That's the key thing you need to do right at the start. And then when you've looked at the sources, try to think about how they relate to what you already know about the course and the content that you've done. Once you've done that, you could probably come up with a couple of factors that you need to consider, and then use SPI. So you've already used the source, but then you're going to try and make a point relating to the content you know. Get evidence from the source to back that up, and then expand it using the geographical reasoning that you've picked up.